George is coming up. He's the CEO of Virgin Galactic, has been since 2010. And before that, he was the NASA Chief of Staff, which is where we met, I think, and where he helped develop some of the policies that have enabled his business, among other things. And he's also been the Executive Director of the National Space Society. So I give you George Whitesides.
Thanks a lot. Wow. The clicker.
Greg, they've taken it.
Somebody got a clicker out there?
Hey, Greg, did you take the clicker?
All right, I'm just going to get started. Nice to be here. I always feel like IAC is a bit like home. I really entered the international space community in 1999 with Unispace 3, and I think it's really exciting that today we have Robbie and I, who participated in the early days of the Space Generation Forum, here presenting about our companies. And the message that I would share to all the young people is that, you know, you will be the leaders in a few years, and so being a part of this global community at this age will pay dividends as you grow in your career and you make linkages with other countries and other peoples. And I think it's really terrific that the IAC has created opportunities for young people to network with other folks around the world, because I can tell you that the people that I met 15 years ago, 20 years ago are some of my best friends, and they are people who you will go through your career with. And so I think it's a terrific thing that we have. This is just a montage of images of Earth. And I wanted to begin, before I get into my update on Virgin Galactic, about a key thing that I believe is important to the future of our planet, and that is the planetary perspective. And that's something that we think that we will play a key role in as we progress with our company. You know, we have a bunch of challenges facing our planet, and I am of the firm belief that it is the perspective from space that will help us solve many of those challenges, and it is the perspective of space that is so important to share with the young people of the world, because so much of our challenges can be sort of crystallized and developed from the idea of the Earth as a spaceship. And I think all of us have a responsibility to evangelize that perspective of space, because it is going to be, I think, the key concept that will help us progress forward as we deal with the biggest challenges of our planet. So I'm going to start now with an update on Virgin Galactic, which is Richard Branson's space company. We have two business areas, suborbital human spaceflight and orbital small satellite launch. What I'll do is I'll take you through human spaceflight first. We have some news there to share, and then we'll go into the small satellite launch business. We now have roughly 800 employees, and so we have changed over the years from a company that was initially really focused on selling flights to space to now a full-service engineering, test, and space operations organization with a variety of locations around the United States and also in the United Kingdom. So let's start with this chart, which I think is always really interesting. So only 500 odd people have ever been to space, and we've got some of them in the room here today with us. And I think that the people who have been to space are some of the most incredible people, but I also think that that number is far too low. We need far more people who have had the opportunity to experience space and to bring that planetary perspective back down to Earth and down to their home communities. And if the success of our effort is measured not by how many dozens of people we have sent to space, but how many hundreds and thousands and eventually tens of thousands of people we have sent to space. I think that is the key metric, because the more of those people who have come back, who have experienced that perspective of space as a spaceship that we all share, I think the more people that we can bring back, the better we will be positioned to solve some of the greatest challenges that we have. So on September 8th, we were happy to fly our new spaceship, which is called VSS Unity. And this was a big moment for our team. Unlike the first spaceship, this spaceship was built by our own team in Mojave, California, by about 400 of the most talented and dedicated space engineers and technicians, I think, in the business. And we are now going to go into our new test flight program for VSS Unity. Yesterday I got word that we do not need to do another captive carry flight, so the next flight we will be doing is the first glide flight, and that will come relatively soon. And then we will go through a series of glide tests where we will confirm the aerodynamic characteristics of the vehicle. And then once we are complete with the glide test program of the spaceship, we will move into powered flight, and we hope to progress through the powered test flight program relatively quickly. I'd like to emphasize that we still have a ways to go in our test flight program, and we will take each step of that program at the right pace. We're going to let the engineers tell us when we're ready to move on to each next phase of the test flight program. But what's exciting for us is that we now have our destiny at our control. We have an incredible test flight team now inside the company. We have a terrific group of maintainers and operators inside the company. And I want to share a little bit about our first flight, if I can. I'm not sure if that's able to be teed up now. This is by our head of operations, Mike Moses, who was the chair of the mission management team for the space shuttle.
Since Wes is flying, who's briefing the instrument control room for me today?
I mean, I can still do it.
All right, NTC and Nicole will chase everything with the airplanes.
So today's a really exciting day here in Mojave. It's our first captive carry flight, our first.
All right.
Okay, so that is, see if I can move on to our next section. These are some of our pilots. We've got world-class group of pilots, and they're eager to start test flight. So I want to just spend a few minutes on our orbital small satellite launch vehicle, because we're tremendously excited about this. We started this program about 5 years ago, and we've made a lot of progress, and we're getting ready to begin our test flight program next year for LauncherOne in service of great customers like Greg and his team and others. So really, I think that there are a few amazing, exciting trends going on in space right now. One is the prospect of opening up space to human spaceflight in a big way, and you'll hear from our colleagues at Blue as well later on. And the other is the small satellite revolution, and you'll hear from Robbie in a bit later on that. And this is such an exciting world, and we want to be an enabler to that with LauncherOne. So we'll tell you a little bit about that. So LauncherOne is a two-stage small satellite launch system. It's air deployed, and we have about 250 people working on this right now in Long Beach, California. It's a LOX kerosene on both stages, and pump-fed engines in both engines, and it's a completely composite vehicle. So we're building all the tanks ourselves, and we're building all the engines ourselves, and all the avionics as well. We recently, last year, bought our platform, which is a 747-400, and that is being modified as we speak in Waco, Texas at L3. We'll show you a little bit of just some footage from that as well, and I'll just talk over that as we go through it. So obviously a key part of this is the desire to be incredibly responsive, and as Greg said, we desire to go to really new levels of responsiveness. That is to say, the time between someone delivering a satellite to us and us being able to launch that satellite into orbit. We want to create the world's most responsive satellite launch vehicle. This is our new facility in Long Beach, California. As you can see, it's now full of manufacturing equipment and engineers. We have the latest CNC and other machines there that will be building these vehicles at the rate of, we hope, eventually 20 to 30 a year. We have a new partnership with DMG Mori for advanced manufacturing, and we think that this is predicated on having a very robust carrier aircraft as well as reliable engines, which we're testing now in Mojave, California. These are both our design. They're called the Newton 3 and the Newton 4 engines, and they are designed to be low-cost, efficient engines that will help us deliver these payloads into space for our customers. The key thing for me is that many small sat companies are waiting now for rides to space. And what we want to do is provide a dedicated ride to those vehicles so that they can get up there, build their business cases, and create thriving businesses that are part of this low Earth orbit revolution. These are just some pictures of our facilities. We've made substantial investments in CapEx, not just for our development program, but also for our manufacturing program. And we really do aspire to be pumping out these vehicles at a rate of several a month. Just in terms of payload performance, we're looking at about 300 kilograms to a sun-synchronous orbit and about 500 kilograms to a equatorial orbit. That latter thing is quite important, we think, because it's an air-launched platform, we're able to provide direct injection into equatorial orbits, which is something that is very rare and are arguably unavailable for most other small satellite platforms. And so this is a really important distinction that we think we'll be able to bring to the market. We'll be able to service a wide variety of small satellite payload form factors, everything from CubeSats in a stacked formation to the larger side of small satellites ranging up from 200 to 500 kilograms. So those are all my slides, but I think I'd like to just take it back to the thing that I started with, which is that planetary perspective. I truly do think that every one of you in this room is part of arguably the most important activity that humankind is pursuing that right now, and that is the long-term transition into maintaining our global spaceship Earth. And that is going to be the task for humanity over the coming years as we figure out how to monitor and regulate and control and work in harmony with our spaceship, which has been working well for life for billions of years. And now we have the responsibility to essentially tend that spaceship together. And it is the space community that will be the ones that lead the way towards both the technical and some of the regulatory aspects of that management. I feel that very strongly, and so I think the work that we're doing together is very important. And at Virgin Galactic, by opening up that perspective into space, whether that's through people actually going or whether it's providing access to the small satellites that will provide such amazing services, we think we're playing an important part of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Again, if you have a question, please raise your hand and someone will bring you a microphone. And let me just start by asking how many people you have signed up, how much they've paid in deposits, and what sort of training they need to fly as either a tourist or a researcher.
Yeah, so on the suborbital spaceflight side, we have about 700 customers who've paid, and they will go through roughly a week of training. Obviously, one of the interesting parts of our company is that we'll be putting people who are not trained in high-speed test flight into an environment that they are that they need to be prepared for to fully enjoy. And so we've designed a 3-day process where they'll be trained on the vehicle, they'll be trained on how to get the most out of their time in space, and obviously they'll be trained in various safety aspects of the experience.
Okay. You're doing expendable launch vehicles. Of course, there's also a trend to reusable launch as the market for launch seems to be growing with these smaller satellites. Can you address the nature of that competition, what you can bring, and how that would play against a reusable competitor?
Well, actually, I'm a big believer in reusability, and our spaceship is an intrinsically reusable vehicle. And so we actually believe in the prospect of reusability, and we're looking at designs for LauncherOne that integrate reusability. But what I think you see is that you don't have to start there. And particularly in small launch, the advantages of reusability really need to be designed carefully for them to actually pay off. Because the vehicles are relatively cheap, you need to have smart reusability to make it work from a business plan perspective. So we won't start with reusability, but I don't think you should be surprised if we integrate aspects of reusability down the road.
And on your reusable vehicle, of course you're going suborbital, coming back to where you started. It's not too far a step to point over long distances. I wonder if you could give us some insight into your long-range planning for that type of activity, particularly since Richard Branson owns an airline.
Yeah, Richard is very interested in doing high-speed point-to-point, and I think we both share the opinion that it's sort of crazy that we're still going Mach 0.8 in aviation travel after all these years. That's not a trivial thing to do. What we will be doing with Spaceship Two is learning many of the key lessons that need to be learned to do high-speed point-to-point. Not all of them, but many of them. How do you put people in a higher G environment? How do you do highly reusable vehicles? How do you integrate space vehicles into the National Airspace System? These are important things. How do you do reusable thermal protection? How do you do reliable avionics? These are key things, and I think down the road that is actually the longer term goal that we'd like to achieve.
Thanks. I see a question here.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. You mentioned a partnership with DMG Mori. Could you say more about that and whether you're using additive manufacturing, aka 3D printing, in your production process?
Well, we're a big believer in modern manufacturing, and we think that particularly in engine production, the entire industry is eventually going to move to that. We're very proud to be working with DMG Mori, which some of you may know is one of the most advanced manufacturing companies in the world. They have now produced what is called an additive and subtractive machine, so it can both form essentially metal shapes actively, and then in the same machine through automated controls, it can take material out of that. And that's a very important thing because the forms you get with additive metal manufacturing are often not incredibly precise, so you need a subtractive tool to put into that. Our goal is to reduce the amount of time that it takes to produce our engines from many months down to eventually weeks, and to essentially close the door of the machine that we have purchased from DMG Mori, and 2 or 3 weeks later, a Newton 3 engine comes out. Newton 3 is about this size, and the machine that we have can create a part that is that big. And we'll be talking more about that capability over the coming months. There's still research that needs to be done. It's still the beginning of that era and that field, but I think it's absolutely the direction that the business is going.
Thanks. Other questions? Right here.
Hi, it was a really good presentation, thank you. So my question is more on the philosophy of space travel and space flight. Well, we all think that spaceflight changes your life. I mean, we have heard from astronauts and people who have been up in space, but is there scientific evidence of how spaceflight impacts your actions back on Earth? Is there any long-term impact, and are you working with organizations, or would you be willing to work with organizations who can study these things?
That's a great question. I'll answer it in two ways. One, we know that there is an impact on space because one of the images that I showed, that blue marble shot from the Apollo program, I think conclusively had a big impact on how humanity views our planet, and I think that that increased consciousness played a big role in the development of the environmental movement and how the environmental movement progressed in the 1960s and 70s up to the present. But there's also something called the overview effect, which has been scientifically studied, which is basically how people are affected when they go into space and they come back. And a researcher at Harvard has studied this for many years, and it has been scientifically documented that people come back with a changed worldview. Not everyone, but many, and I would say probably most do. And that's what we're very excited to share with the world more broadly.
More questions? George, let me ask you then, Greg talked about mitigating debris. He's mass-producing satellites. You're mass-producing launchers, including launches for his satellites. What kind of steps is Virgin taking to prevent the expansion of the debris field up there?
Well, I think our suborbital vehicle will not create any debris. It's a suborbital trajectory, and the orbital vehicle, due to the nature of its trajectory, will obviously re-enter the second stage. I think we all in the space industry have a responsibility and a self-interest to make sure that the space environment is sustainable, just like we have a self-interest in making sure that Spaceship Earth is sustainable. And so we look forward to supporting our customers. I think Greg Weiler at OneWeb and Robbie Shingler at Planet Labs have really led the way in terms of responsible use of low Earth orbit with larger constellations. I'm sure Robbie can speak to that much more intelligently than I can, but we will support our customers and certainly encourage our customers. I'm going to be helping to manage the World Economic Forum Space Security Committee over the coming years, and that will certainly be part of the agenda as well there.
Other questions? Let me ask you then about I know you're going to be using the spaceship for researchers as well as tourists. And I wonder if you could explain how that's going to work. Will these be dedicated flights? And also what sort of mix you foresee?
Well, we have a contract with NASA now to provide experimental payloads on board Spaceship, or to provide access to space for payloads on board Spaceship Two. And I think what people are excited about is the idea that they can try out technologies in a rapid way, in a quick way, and in a low-cost way before they deploy them to the International Space Station or other orbital destinations. So the other interesting thing that people can do is that they can actually interact with their experiment while they're in space. And so we have Alan Stern is a customer who will be putting a payload on board and will be interacting with it in the space environment. And I think that, that opens up a whole wide range of potential research areas, and we think that that's going to be an exciting focus. And many of the folks in this room may want to conduct space research on board Spaceship Two, and we look forward to serving them.
Other questions? I see a hand way in the back there.
Hello. Hi. I was wondering if you have an updated timeline on when the first tourist spaceflight might take place. If you could also describe what people could experience, how long would this flight last? Also, how much would it cost? And if those costs would one day come down? And given that some people are looking way beyond orbit, like places like Mars, do you have any plans to go even further one day?
Okay, yes, so the cost is $250,000. We definitely aspire to bringing that cost down over time. The flight duration from takeoff to landing will be about roughly an hour and a half to an hour and 15 minutes. Order of magnitude, hour and a half. You'd be in space for a shorter period than that, but takeoff to landing is about an hour and a half. And I'm sorry, what were the other questions? Oh, are we going to Mars? So I actually got into the space community partly because I was really enthusiastic about Mars, and I think it's a really inspiring goal. I think Richard, in my view, is that we're going to be pretty focused on planet Earth for the immediate future, but I know that Richard has aspirations about other things, which we'll talk about at the right time. But I do think that the most important thing is to increase access to space, and we're going to do that by bringing down the cost of suborbital access over time, and by decreasing the cost for small satellites over time. Those are our two main focuses right now.
Great, thank you very much, George. Let's give George a round of applause for an interesting presentation.